Friends, a wise man once told me that life, it's all about balance. For example, last summer you and I had the very good fortune of driving a car that holds the title of the baddest ass Cadillac. So it will come as no surprise to you that today we're going to drive a car, well, a crossover that holds a different title, the best-selling Cadillac. Now, if you are new to our little show here, we do things a bit different. We split these cars up in a tech review, which comes first, and then a full first drive review, which this is. And in the tech review of this car, we talked about how this is a completely new engine, only shares 3 parts from the 3.6 that came before it. So what's going on here? Effectively, it is the same displacement, 3.6 V6, but what they've done is added some new technology to it. So number one, it's active fuel management, so it will cut from 6 to 4 cylinders when there's less load. And then number two, when you're sitting at a light or in a parking lot, it will shut off the engine, so it's got the active start-stop. So putting aside the new technology, really, what is the output of the engine? That's the thing that's exciting to us car guys and gals. So it's 310 horsepower, which comes in at a relatively high engine speed, 6,700 RPM, and then it's 271 pound-feet of torque, which also comes in at a relatively high engine speed of 5,000 RPM. Ideally, I'd like to see that coming in somewhere below 2,500, which is kind of where the trend has been nowadays, especially from something this size. Now, this is connected to a new 8-speed automatic transmission that has like the pneumatic controls. Now, put all of that together and an all-wheel drive system, which this car has, how does that translate to the road? So if you guys saw our Cadillac CT6 episode, you know that we did not get the opportunity to drive this engine in that car. So really, this is the first time you and I are driving an all-new Cadillac, or really I should say a General Motors engine, because I believe this is going to be shared with other General Motors cars. Okay, so let's come around the bend here, and as the road straightens, let's put our foot into it, try pulling power. And I gotta say, I've been driving this thing, I wanna say a couple hours now, and I'm somewhat taken aback by how much more pulling power this has, or at least the feel of it, over the SRX. Now, there are a couple of moving parts that go into that, namely an adjustable throttle mapping, and that's really a function of this mode button down here. Now, this mode button, it changes a lot of other things besides the throttle mapping, but for this part of our episode, let's focus on just the throttle mapping. So we've been doing this all in tour mode, which let's liken that to comfort mode. It's not the most aggressive throttle mapping. Okay, so with that, let's switch to sport mode. Put our foot into it as we come around somewhat, I'd say a sweeper, but a little bit of a right-handed turn here. And yes, if I'm being honest, I'm not really noticing a huge amount of difference in the throttle mapping. I am noticing the transmission downshifting a little bit quicker, so overall you do get some more acceleration out of this thing. But while we do this, I think the biggest thing you notice, and it's not just in the sport mode, for a crossover, it sounds kind of mean. Almost like somebody, maybe the mad scientist, got into the development of this thing, because it's technically not his car. Paul, this is the chief engineer of this car, not Dave. Someone got into this exhaust and started to fool with it and wanted to make it sound a little bit more mean, as opposed to the number one in the segment is the Lexus. And if you're really going to cross-shop this against the Lexus, you're going to go into the Lexus showroom and you're like driving like, it's very quiet. It's the relentless pursuit of perfection, and it's not like marketing mumbo jumbo, where here they're saying, yeah, we're number 2, but we're proud, and listen to us. Okay, so this is the point of the episode where you guys need to pay attention, get your notebooks out, your iPad, your speak and spell. I don't care how you do it, we got a lot to cover. So in the tech review of this car, we spent a lot of time focusing on construction methods, specifically how Cadillac engineers pilfered some of the lightweighting technology from the CT6 and applied it here. Now, they didn't bring everything over, if I'm really being honest. Remember those stunning castings that are here and here that reduce the number of parts here from 35 and the number of parts here from 20 down to 1 at each point? Well, that didn't make the trip. And if I'm really reading the tea leaves correctly here, it's because this car is about 12 grand cheaper than the CT6, hence you don't get really castings that are kind of like artwork. So let's press on because we have other driving dynamics bits to cover. So up front, McPherson struts, here in the back, a 5-link unit. Now that's all fine and good, but this one, notice, has the 20-inch wheels, which means it has the ZF adjustable dampers, or ZF, depending on the region of the world you're in. These adjustable dampers, they have 2 settings. There is a comfort, or they call it tour, and a sport. But then, putting aside all that, notice there's a little bit more length in this door here. So Paul, who is the chief engineer of this car, and Larry tell me there's an extra 2 inches in wheelbase here, which translates to 3.2 inches in more knee room back here. So you have a physically longer wheelbase. So put all of that together, how does it affect the driving dynamics? But wait, there is more. There's still one thing in the middle here somewhere that I'm going to leave as a surprise. That is, let's just say, very unusual, but very cool, that impacts driving dynamics. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like stupidly excited about the idea of like a twin clutch system that enables you to disengage the all-wheel drive system. There's only one downside to this whole thing. You can't make it rear drive. I did ask Paul, the chief engineer, and Larry, who's our buddy from like way back in the day, like one of the earliest episodes of the show. I asked him, like, how about you make like a MotoMan mode where it's just rear wheel drive? And they kind of looked at me like I'm crazy. But anyway, I digress. So right now we are in tour mode. And what that means, that translates to front wheel drive mode. So what you get is, in terms of driving dynamics, you get some composure, but if we're gonna pick up the speed here, and please don't try this at home, we've got a curve coming up here, there's an interesting thing that happens. And this one is, remember, this is a 20-inch wheel car, so this has got the adjustable dampers. Interesting thing happens, we come around this turn, and there's virtually no lean in the rear. Yeah, in the comfort mode, or this tour mode, it leans a little bit to the side, but there's just a wee bit of plow in the front, which obviously this is a front-wheel drive-based vehicle, so I can kind of see where they get that. But now let's switch to the all-wheel drive mode, which is labeled all-wheel drive. Go around the turn a bit more. There is a bit more composure. It's not a huge difference because all this is doing is switching on the twin clutch to engage the rear-wheel drive system. Get it? Okay, so now let's switch to sport mode, and a couple of things happen. Number one, the dampers stiffen up. Number two, the throttle mapping changes, the transmission mapping changes, but most importantly, I was talking with Larry, our engineering friend, and he was saying that the power is more rear biased. Now, it's not a specific number, it's not fixed, like 67% goes to the rear. It's constantly variable, but the power does go more to the rear in most cases. So with that, we got a nice turn coming up here. Let's put our foot into this thing. And we notice a couple of things. Number one, there's significantly less lean to the side. There's virtually no roll on the rear, but you kind of lose that plow in the front. Now that's really a function of tuning, and again, I was talking with our engineer friend Larry, and he was telling me that in the development of this vehicle, what they did is they really focused on the yaw control and raising the limits of intervention. So normally you'd have a vehicle like this that would have like really tightened down, like the hand of God would come in on you on the yaw control, so you don't basically lean too much or really get the thing out of whack. Where here, what they've done is given me a little bit more control back of the yaw, thus having a little bit more fun. But then the dampers come in, and that basically keeps the stability of the vehicle, even though I'm trying to power the car through a turn, which I don't think most people that would buy these things would be doing this kind of stuff, but it's nice to know that there are guys like Larry looking out for us. Now we got to put Larry aside because there's one other thing about driving dynamics that frankly we don't ever talk about, and that's visibility. Take a look at the mirror. Look where it is. It's actually mounted to the door, no longer onto the window. So what that is enabled is they've got this extra window. This used to be called an opera window way back in the day, where like Mad Men days, you'd have like Betty Draper and her like flicking her cigarettes out here. But really here today, it's more visibility. So actually now as I look as I'm driving, and especially when I'm trying to do some of these Larry tricks with the driving dynamics, when I'm coming around, the racing trick is you go where you look. So if I'm coming around a turn, now I'm looking more out this way, and guess what? I have a better field of vision as I make turns. Hence, driving dynamics. So a little programming note here. The XT5 we are driving, which is very pretty in that shade of red, it is not the fanciest XT5 out there. This one is. This is the Platinum model, which has the fancier leather. It has the micro suede on the dash and on the headliner. But there's also one other trick I had to show you, and that is the mirror here. So if you look here, it's an old school mirror that you would see in any Cadillac dating back to like the 50s, or really any car for that matter. But then if you pull this little lever here, all of a sudden it turns into an LCD screen. It uses the rear view camera, and the idea is to increase the field of vision by 300%, 300, so then you get in the car effectively. Let's close the door and try this trick here. We go into reverse, and all of a sudden I can see the CT6 behind me, and also the cars across the street, as well as around the block with all this 300% view. Sadly, only on the Platinum model. So I was so moved by the beauty of northern San Diego County here, I figured we'd try something different and let Mike do some driving here. Mike is our cameraman. Really this is a function of the discussion we've had with Larry and Paul and how they shared those numbers about the wheelbase and the extra legroom in the back. And on paper, 2 inches for the wheelbase and 3.2 in the legroom doesn't sound like a lot. But in reality, I am 6 foot tall, and that seat is where I would sit if I were in the front. And obviously you can see there's definitely some room here. I could sit here on a long trip, but there is a little trick here. These seats are adjustable fore and aft, so let's say if we put these things forward to allow for, say, more junk back there, if you had kids with you or something like that, there's still some room here, not as comfortable, but there's still some room here. So long and short, those little numbers, 2 inches and 3.2 inches, very usable. Then there's a couple of other moving parts going on back here. Yeah, you get like an armrest here that comes down, but the seats are split 40, 20, 40, so you could bring this thing down here. Then you have a pass-through for like skis, and they've got this cage thing back here to like compartmentalize the rear. And then you can adjust the air conditioning yourself back here, there's heated seats. And then last but not least, so in this world of iPhones and Androids, the two can coexist side by side, even in the back, because there are 2 USB charging points in the rear. And then kind of, if you are actually paying attention to the car and putting aside your phone and joining into the conversation that you should inside the car, one thing you can't help but notice is the build materials are significantly better than the SRX. Like, yeah, the cut and sew is like an old school Cadillac trick, which is nice to see. And this one, believe it or not, this is not the fanciest one. This is like the middle of the road model. The premium gets much better leather here, and it gets like a micro suede headliner like we saw in the CT6 episode. But the thing you really got to notice, the window switches. Like, the window switches are an improvement over the SRX. So with that, I guess it's all window switches these days. So the mirror is not the only design trick up the sleeves of Brian Smith, Bob Boniface, and some of the other guys in Cadillac design. Let's just say those guys are freaks about classic cars, to the point where they're pushing me to get some classic cars. So they take design details from like old Alphas and things like that. And riddle me this, where is the rear wiper of this crossover? If you said hidden underneath the spoiler, you would be correct. Now there's still some other business we need to tend to up front here. First and foremost, the gauges. Now, I do read the comments of these episodes, and I see how you guys beat the crap out of the gauges on Cadillac, specifically the ATS, and not without reason. Like, you look at a CT6 or a CTS-V from like last summer we drove in Wisconsin, the digital system they got, awesome. But here, these mechanical gauges, which I love me some mechanical gauges, the ones in the ATS, not great. But notice they've gone with a whole paradigm shift here, which looks significantly better. Hopefully this cascades down to the ATS. Now with that, there are 2 other changes here. You and I have driven a number of cars with Apple CarPlay, many of them GM cars. So we drove, the Camaro, we drove the CTS-V, and we drove the CT6, all with Apple CarPlay. And, excuse me, the 360 video we did on the Chevrolet Volt, which you still have to see if you haven't seen it. Virtual reality people. Anyway, here, Apple CarPlay, which we're starting to see, it's like ubiquitous throughout General Motors. So here I've got my iPhone connected, it's all wonderful and everything. But check this out. We're going to try this Please don't try this at home. I know you guys complain in the comments about it. I'm gonna do it on the same. Notice I'm paying attention. My eyes are on the road, and I have another device here. Notice, it's another cable. It's still white, so it's kind of confusing, but it's not an Apple device. Notice this switch to the Q system. Now this has got the faster processor that we experienced in the CTS first, and then the CT6. So let's plug this thing in. There's two back here. Only one of them actually work with this system here. Notice it takes some doing. And then look what happens. I plug in my Android device, and notice what comes up. Android Auto. So we've done this hot swapping trick a couple of times. Oh look, Boogie Nights. This frankly is actually not even my phone. I actually borrowed this phone because mine, it doesn't have the latest version of Android on it to work with Android Auto. But notice it came up with Boogie Nights. Anyway, the point is not to show you Boogie Nights. The point is to do the hot swap trick, which we started in Volkswagens, and now here we are in a Cadillac where we went from an iPhone device to an Android device, and it works harmoniously in the same vehicle as you drive down the road. Oh, and there's one more thing I almost forgot. So notice where I put the iPhone, and notice where I put this phone. So let's put this thing back here. So we've seen in a couple of other episodes of Cadillac, actually starting with the ATS Coupe that we drove with Bob Boniface way back in Connecticut. That car had a wireless charging system up here behind the infotainment system. It's a basically Qi-based system. Here, and actually some other Cadillacs have the wireless, basically Qi standard system. But instead of it being like hidden over here, it's actually here between this console, so you can actually have your phone here. So let's say for the sake of discussion, you want your passenger to fool with the phone, or you want to pull over to the side. You don't have to like open this thing, pull the phone out. You literally can do this. So you can get access to the phone, then put it back here, and then it wirelessly charges. Again, it's a Qi-based system, so that means it doesn't work with iPhones out of the box. Yeah, you can get the adapter, but obviously I don't have the adapter on my phone. So long and short of the story, wireless charging in, I would argue, a much more usable place. So in summary, what do we got? Well, we do have some refinement here. And yes, we do have some of the lightweight technology that we saw on the CT6 made its way over here. Now, we don't have everything because frankly, this is a lower priced vehicle than the CT6, so you don't have a lot of budget to play around with very fancy castings that we had in the CT6. Now, I would argue this. The most important thing about the change here is the ethos in building this vehicle. By making the MO everything about lightweight, it has drastically improved every aspect of this vehicle. Let me put it to you a bit of a different way and something more topical. The current political cycle. So we are going through an election year, and no matter who you want to vote for, if you fix campaign finance, you fix everything else. It's that kind of a change. So with that, let's put aside the XT5 for a minute, and I want to pose a question to you guys. If you are into this kind of vehicle, you have this kind of vehicle, or you want this kind of vehicle, my question to you is this. This is more of an evolutionary change, where if you look at the number one in the segment, they went with a more revolutionary change. So my question is very, very simple. In this segment, where this is volume at a somewhat high price, do you want the familiar, the evolution, or do you want something more wild that, I'm shocked to say this, that Lexus did? So let me know which one you would want from a design perspective and in this segment, and why. And don't just tell me which one and why, but tell me for good measure what region of the world you live in and what you currently drive. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you can download for free from Apple iTunes or Google Play, and we found both of them work in this car. And number two, a fun fact. So you see the light signature here, which we've seen in other Cadillacs? Most people think that this was pilfered from the CT6. Actually, it wasn't. The story goes that this car was being designed in one studio across the hallway from the CT6 at the exact same time, and some of the CT6 engineers and designers, they basically went into the XT5 studio and they saw this light signature, which made its way onto the CT6. And until I see you next time, bis später.